Recording. Welcome everyone to the LGBTQ plus inclusivity training. I'm Helen Anderson, the co-chair of the Social Issues Committee. The League of Women Voters is an organization fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. Education opportunities such as today are central to the organization's current and future success in engaging all individuals, households, communities, and policymakers in creating a more perfect democracy. We're happy you are here with us today to take another step towards creating a more inclusive community. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Manatee County, I'm excited to introduce Christine Grossman, the Outreach Coordinator for Also Youth. She has generously agreed to be our teacher for the next 2 hours. I'm going to turn it over to Christine and let her do her own introduction. And thank you again, Christine. Would you also just let us know how people can ask questions along the way? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Christine Grossman. As Helen said, I am the outreach coordinator at Also Youth. So I use she, her pronouns. I do identify as a lesbian, cisgender female, and we're going to be going over a lot of different things today relating to the LGBTQ plus community. Before we get started, I'm going to put a link in the chat, which is just a quick questionnaire about the things that you know about the community. So we can kind of gauge through this training how beneficial it was in teaching you things. There will also be a post-assessment survey as well. I think it's just 6 or 7 questions, nothing too crazy, but if you could complete that before we get started, I would really appreciate it. Now we'll get my PowerPoint loaded up. Make sure the sound is shared. And at any point, if you have any questions, please feel free and drop them in the chat. Helen, would you mind just keeping an eye on the chat through the presentation and letting me know if and when there are questions? Thank you so much. So we can, how is everybody doing on that survey, that assessment survey? I don't want to rush anybody, but I also don't want to start without everyone's full attention. All right, I see 1 thumbs up.
I am sorry, I cannot see it. How do I access it?
It's in the chat. I will drop it in there again. For those of you who just joined, the link will be dropped in there again.
For some reason, I know what the chat is, but I don't see it on this field in the screen. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and I had to escape out of the full screen of the slide presentation so that I could get back to the questionnaire, if that's helpful.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know some of you had come in a little bit later and completing that survey. I appreciate it. So let's get into it. First of all, I would just like to share with you some agreements that I would like to make with everyone in the group today. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that this is a safe space. So if you are uneducated in certain things, it's okay. You won't be judged for not knowing things. And I don't judge others, so I expect that we all do the same in this space and not place judgment on others. There are no stupid questions, so please feel free to ask any and all questions that you have. If you are sharing a story from your experience, I ask that you not use those individuals' names, just so that in case somebody happens to know this individual, you're not outing anybody. So just use alternate names, or just don't use names at all. And I want you all to be open about learning, because this is very difficult for everyone. There are so many terms and identities and gender identity and sexual orientation. There's so much information out there. And despite the fact that this is what I do regularly for my job, I can learn something new every day. So the community is constantly evolving, and really big thing for inclusivity is just to be open to learning about these things that you're not familiar with. And again, ask those questions. So we're going to get started here. So you can see LGBTQIA is the quote unquote official acronym. They have added a P as well. I personally prefer to use LGBTQ+, just so that it's inclusive for any and all identities that may be recognized down the road. So it's just all inclusive with the plus. So sexual orientation is going to be a person's physical, romantic, or emotional, and it could be spiritual attraction, but this is going to be someone's attraction to another individual. Whereas gender identity is going to be how we see ourselves as related to gender. So you can see in the acronym spelled out, we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, and asexual. So not all of these are sexual orientations, and not all of them are gender identities. So we're gonna, through this presentation, we will kind of understand the difference between them and what each individual identity means. And then we have the gender expression. So the gender identity is going to be how individuals label themselves as far as their gender is concerned, not necessarily with their physical anatomy. So gender expression is going to be how someone expresses that gender. So with makeup, the kind of clothes you wear, the way you wear your hair, any of those things can be defined as gender expression, and what you're showing the outside world about how you feel about your gender. So we're going to jump into the sexual orientations here, starting with lesbian. So a lesbian is a woman who's only attracted to other women. So you can see with the flags over here, there has been a bit of evolution to the lesbian flag, and it is a relatively recent development. It started in 2010. You can see with the lipstick mark on there, it was definitely more attuned to the feminine lesbians. As you can see, the lipstick lesbian is kind of what they called this flag. So they have evolved the flag to be more inclusive to all types of lesbians, not just the feminine lesbians. There's a very wide range of individuals that can identify as lesbian, being and express themselves differently through their gender, but that is separate from their identity of being a lesbian. So gay is going to describe men who are only attracted to other men. This is sometimes also used as just a general term for the community. I myself, sometimes when I'm identifying, I say that I'm gay. That does not mean that I'm a man. It's just an overarching term that the community has used for so long. but it refers directly to men who are attracted to men, but can be substituted in other areas. And you can see the 3 different varieties of the gay pride flag. So the first one was designed by Gilbert Baker. He was an artist who was recruited by Harvey Milk, who was the first politician in politician ever to be out as a gay man. And one of his things was to have make a flag for the gay community so that they could be proud of who they were. So you'll see there are more stripes in the first one, and that pink stripe goes away in the second one. So the pink fabric was actually removed because during that time, the dye for the fabric to make it that color was unavailable. So they were kind of forced to remove the pink because of fabric availability. And now you can see how it's evolved just into the 6 colors of the rainbow. And indigo has changed to royal blue. So little bit of evolution of the gay pride flag. Bisexual individuals are going to be people who are attracted to men and women or more than one gender. So a lot of people are of the opinion that bisexual people are just in a phase, or they're just claiming to be bisexual because they're too scared to be gay. And these are not legitimate things. Bisexuality is a legitimate sexual orientation. Individuals can be attracted to more than one gender. And you can actually see in this graph here that bisexual individuals actually represent over half of the LGBT community. So when I leave the other letters off for this graph here, it says LGB. They limit it to those letters because those letters all relate to sexual orientation. So when you're doing data, they want to make sure that they're not including transgender individuals in this kind of data, because that is identified as a gender identity, not a sexual orientation. So it's important to make that distinction. But again, you can see that bisexual people represent more than 50% of the population. Bisexual individuals often face more harassment and discrimination because they tend to get the negative attitudes from both heterosexual as well as homosexual individuals. So they're a very, very unique identity in the fact that they don't really have a place where they can be themselves, despite the fact that the B is in the acronym. A lot of people that identify as bisexual don't feel welcomed in the gay community. That's something here also that we are trying to educate people that this was how things were thought to be, but it is a legitimate sexual orientation. And it's important to recognize that people can have different attractions to different people. So we're going to move on to transgender, which again, we're switching into gender identity. So transgender is going to be an umbrella term for individuals who are assigned a gender at birth that don't match up with their internal sense of self. So when someone is born with masculine anatomy, but on the inside, their gender identity, they feel like a girl. They don't feel like they should have these male body parts because they fully and wholly feel as though they are a woman. So these people are going to identify as transgender. It can also be the other way around. So it can be female to male or male to female. You'll see the picture of Laverne Cox, who is a very famous transgender actress. who has been really, really outspoken about her identity and about her life and being a transgender woman, and really paving the way for transgender individuals in the film industry, because it's something that hasn't necessarily been, those boundaries weren't necessarily broken, and she has helped to break down those barriers to make these actors and actresses who portraying transgender individuals are actually transgender individuals, for the most part in film at this point. You can also see the group of trans men in the other picture. So they all have scars from getting their breast removed. So this is something that trans men are very, very proud of. One of my friends recently completed his top surgery, and he just feels so free in not having to wear those clothing that doesn't feel right for him as his gender identity as a male. So individuals who are not transgender are going to identify as cisgender. So it's going to be cisgender is going to be someone who identifies with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So a woman who identifies as being a woman. So we'll have male and female cisgender individuals, and then you'll have trans men and trans women. You can also, we'll discuss intersex, but you can see the flag represents both the masculine energy with the blue and feminine energy with the white, just to represent that gender can be variant in different people. So queer questioning is a broad term that is generally inclusive of people who are not straight or cisgender. So somebody who is straight can identify within the LGBTQ plus community if they don't identify as cisgender. So queer was previously a really, really derogatory term that wasn't used, and it was, taken back by the queer community and have really reclaimed this word and use it as a positive identity. A lot of people will just identify as queer regarding their sexual orientation because they're just not sure that any of the identities necessarily fit how they personally feel. So this is just a more broad term. Questioning is going to describe a person who is not sure about their sexual orientation and or their gender identity, but not comfortable labeling themselves yet because they're not sure which label aligns with their feelings. So when someone's going through the experience of trying to determine, what is my gender identity, what is my sexual orientation, they don't have to worry about, stressing to make a decision because, what letter, what is my identity? Questioning is a valid identity. And it can be a difficult process to accept your identity depending on where you have support at home or in school. But you can see in the picture here, these are the Queer Eye for the Straight Guy individuals. This is the second go around for them. This is the second cast. And Jonathan Van Ness, who is the gentleman on the left side with the skirt, it identifies as non-binary, which we will get into. But all of these individuals help others to, discover themselves and to be true to who they truly are. So intersex is going to be, quote unquote, the third gender. So intersex individuals are going to have hormones, chromosomes, or anatomy that are different from medical community's standard of normal and sexual binary system. So there are many, many, many people who are born with anatomy of both genders, either internal or external or a combination of both. There are individuals that are born fully female with all female anatomy, yet their chromosomes are different, which would identify them as intersex. So the interesting thing about being intersex is that you don't always know that you are, because it's not something that you can see on the outside unless you have testing done to, look at your hormone levels and look at your chromosomes. People may not know that they are in fact intersex. So that's something to really stress, is that just because someone is, looking like a female, it doesn't mean that they are. And it can vary from person to person. It's not just a binary system of man and woman. There is some gray area in between. So asexual is going to be individuals who do not experience sexual attraction and do not have a desire for any sexual activity. So these individuals are referred to as the ACEs community. And this is very, very, very different from celibacy and not having sex. That's a choice of not having, you're making that decision not to have sex. Whereas an asexual individual is not going to have to not have to do it. They don't have that desire or the attraction or the will to engage in sexual behaviors. And again, this is viewed as a spectrum. So it can vary from person to person. And, as far as sex, some people may have, limited interest in certain different types of behaviors. But just, again, keep in mind that this is not the same thing as celibacy. It's an individual that has no desire for that sexual activity that is generally experienced. So I mentioned non-binary earlier with Jonathan Van Ness. So you can see here in the picture at the bottom that there's a spectrum of where a gender can be, right? So you can be super, super feminine, which is represented by the Barbie. And these are very stereotypical, the best that I could find. So on the other end, we have G.I. Joe. So super feminine, super masculine. But there are all of these people in between those extremes that identify with different experiences through their gender identity. So you can have someone who has, a little bit of masculine energy, a little bit of feminine energy, somebody that has mostly feminine energy, but a little bit of masculine energy here and there. Generally, people who are non-binary are going to identify outside of that binary system. So non-binary individuals will not be the 1 or the 12 on this scale. They are going to be 2 through 11. And it can be any of the combinations that you see here, including others that aren't even listed here. So generally, people who identify as non-binary use pronouns that are they, them. So it's important to identify these individuals, how they prefer. So Sam Smith is on the right here with the red background. He's a singer, or they are a singer. They just recently came out as non-binary and use they, them pronouns. And then we also have Demi Lovato, who again recently came out as non-binary and again uses they, them pronouns. So these two individuals are really stepping out in the community and making a face for this identity that is, again, a valid identity that a lot of people relate with. So it's just very important to make sure that you're identifying people and referring to people as the pronouns that they prefer, which we'll get into pronouns in a little bit more detail a bit later in the presentation. So pansexual is going to describe people who are attracted to multiple sexes and genders. So that sounds very similar to bisexual. You can see in this chart here that the prefix bi means two and the prefix pan means all. So when we're talking about gender identity, initially within the community, it was, the gender identity was not necessarily there. So there were just two genders. But now with the expansion of our understanding of gender and the differences that can be shown by all different people through the community. So the pansexual individuals are going to be attracted to people regardless of gender. So gender is an irrelevant thing to pansexual people. They fall in love with the person for the person, for their qualities, their characteristics, their personality, their sense of humor. It has nothing to do with the gender they identify with. So the difference between them is very, very slim. But the big thing I like to stress about this is that whatever an individual identifies as, it's important to respect that identity. So somebody can identify as bisexual, but be attracted to all genders. And someone who is pan can, it's really just a personal preference. Whatever the individual feels most represents themselves is the identity that they're going to really vibe with. And it's important to identify and validate all identities in individuals, so to make sure that they know that they are accepted for who they are, regardless of the labels that they choose for themselves. So we have a bit of a checkpoint. I know that was a lot as far as the different identities. Some of them can be rather confusing, to myself included, even working in this field. Again, like I said earlier, I am constantly learning. So I just want to see how much you're paying attention, and you can feel free and put your answers in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself. But the first question is going to be, what are some of the identities that are included in the LGBTQ plus community? So what do those letters stand for? The LGBTQ plus. This can include sexual orientation as well as gender identities. Alice says lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. Annie's got them. All right, so people are paying attention. I love it. That means you are all interested in learning and making sure that our communities are more inclusive, which I had no doubt this group would be. Now, the next question is there a difference between sexual orientation and gender identity? And if you could explain, if you believe there is a difference, what the difference is. Yes, exactly, Rhonda. So Rhonda said, one is how you see yourself, the other is who you are sexually attracted to. Great job. So asexual individuals want to have sex with others, true or false? Right, bunch of falses. Great. And does anybody have any questions or comments about anything that we've discussed in this first portion here? Yes,
I have
Helen.
a few questions in the chat if I could share those with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the first one is around the flags. Can straight people put out the pride flag as a sign of support or acceptance, or is it strictly used to kind of show others how you identify?
It can be flown by anybody. If you want to show support for your queer community and you want to hang a rainbow flag, you hang that rainbow flag. My godmother lives in Gulfport, and identifies as a straight woman. She has 3 kids, one of which identifies in the community, and she has a rainbow flag hanging outside of her house every day. So she's actually been told by some delivery people, like, oh, thank you so much for having that. So anytime, at least for me, whenever I see a rainbow flag, I'm like, oh, yay. Like it just makes me happy. So it doesn't matter if it's a queer or straight person flying said flag. It's about what the flag represents in that inclusivity and kindness and just, you know, accepting people for who they truly are.
Thank you. Will you at all during the presentation, or could you now touch on the controversy, especially in Florida, around transgender women in sports? And should it be how the individual identifies, what their chromosomes say, birth gender?
So that's a very, very, very hot topic, especially in Florida right now. And it's one of those things that everybody has an opinion on, or you don't have an opinion at all because you're just not sure about the legalities. But the big thing with sports is that no one should be excluded from sports. There's so much that you can get from playing on an athletic team. And this is just my perspective. Everybody has their own perspective. There are some thoughts that having male-born individuals play women's sports would put other women in danger of these trans people's strength, when it's got nothing to do with strength, nothing to do with skill. I personally think that anybody should be able to play whatever sport they want or use whatever bathroom they want with whatever gender they identify with. So again, this is a very hot topic. Some people are very highly opposed to it. I know I have friends who have young girls who are playing sports, and they are concerned about their kids playing sports with male-born individuals, which I can understand. But at the same time, all kids deserve that equality and that opportunity to thrive in a team setting, because it's so important. I was an athlete as a kid, and it was just so beneficial, you know, as far as teamwork, as far as leadership, as far as, you know, staying physically active. It's so important that we can validate these individuals for how they're feeling. And I think that it's especially important to try and push for it now that it is such an issue. The fact of the matter is that there are a lot of men who are born that are not super strong and athletic. Not all men are strong, athletic men. And not all women play sports. So it's to allow people to identify however they feel comfortable and participate in a space that they identify with. I think it's, in my opinion, kind of cruel to take that away from a child just because they're transgender.
Thank you. There was a comment, and I think there's a question about this. So when you were asking about the identities included in the LGBTQ plus community or acronym, you use the word identities, but there's the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. So just saying identities was a bit confusing. And so I wondered if you could comment on using the phrase identity, and do you have to say gender before that to be specific?
So identity can refer to either gender or sexual. You can also call sexual orientation sexual identity. So it's how you identify in a sexual manner. It's just more commonly known as sexual orientation, but they are both identities. They're just representing different things in that individual. Does that clear up that question for whoever asked it?
It was more of a comment, and I see some nods. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I have a couple more. Do we have time for more questions, or do you want to keep going?
I see are there more that were earlier, or is?
So
are
there
you
was
talking-
pronouns. There's been a couple of people who direct messaged me with questions.
Okay.
So here's one more. There is attraction and action. When you identify as cisgender, but are occasionally attracted to someone of your own sex, what are you?
That is up to you. And I know that that's kind of a, like, really, that's not an answer, but it is. If you have, there are straight people that have been attracted to, you know, a female actress, like, oh my God, she's just so beautiful. Or, you know, it's up to you. If you have attraction to a woman and you feel like you can, you know, that's something that is a part of you. You may choose to identify as bisexual. You may choose to identify as pansexual. You may end up finding out that you really, really like women and are not a fan of men at all. So it really depends on the person and how they feel on the inside. Nobody can really, well, people can label you, but as far as labels, we pick those for ourselves. So it's however you feel comfortable identifying. So again, it's personal preference.
And then finally, the last one that came through was that there is a question about safety in terms of use of bathrooms. And apparently there was a case in Virginia where a girl was raped by a man claiming not to be male in a women's restroom. Have you, do you have insight on those cases?
I have heard about that case. Something that I personally like to stress when hearing stories like this, bad things happen. Bad things happen everywhere. And I don't think that situation was necessarily a queer person targeting a kid. I think it was somebody who has some other things going on in their head, who saw an opportunity to take advantage of a young person and did so. Do I believe that's acceptable? Absolutely not. But in all of the people in the world who identify as transgender, if there's one case where this happens and you're thinking about all of the bathrooms through the entire country, the statistics are pretty low as far as situations like that happening. And yes, they have happened. I think in most cases, it's an individual that sees a predator who sees an opportunity to get away with something and taking advantage of that. I would not categorize those crimes as like queer people acting out toward the community. I think that's more of a predator finding an opportunity to access prey.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's all I have.
All right, so we're gonna go in here. We have a video for you, which kind of goes through gender and just kind of explains what we've been talking about, just in different terms. So I'm gonna have you guys watch that and see a different perspective.
Girl, boy, man,
Can you hear the
woman,
sound?
cisgender, transgender, queer, gender non-queer,
gender
unicorn. With so many gender identities and terms being used, gender can be confusing to anyone. So what is gender? There are three categories to this conversation: biological sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Most people confuse biological sex with gender. Biological sex refers to biological traits that are usually determined by chromosomes. Most people are born male or female, with some people being born intersex. Someone is intersex when they're born without the typical XX or XY chromosomes. For example, a person may be born appearing female, but may actually have a male anatomy on the inside. Or a person may be born with genitals that appear between male or female. So biological sex, which determines if someone was born male, female, or intersex, is determined right at birth. Gender identity, however, is different. Gender is a social construct. That's right, a social construct, used to characterize traits within a person. People have put these arbitrary ideas of gender onto virtually everything, from genitals, types of clothing, career paths, and even colors. In today's society, tuxedos, penises, the color blue, and a love of football are considered masculine gender markers, while breasts, the color pink, dresses, and a love of Barbies are considered female gender markers. Many see gender as real, determined at birth, or a binary split between masculine and feminine. Yet these gender markers are not determined by your biological sex. They are ideas that we tend to assign a person based on sex. However, put simply, gender is how you see yourself. Biological males are given the masculine gender of boy, and biological females are given the feminine gender of girl. This is known as assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. Many people feel perfectly comfortable with their assigned gender based on biological sex. These people are considered cisgendered. If you are a cis male or a cis female, your gender identity matches your biological sex. But for some people, their assigned gender identity doesn't feel right. So when a person's biological sex does not line up with their gender identity, they're considered transgender. Many trans people feel uncomfortable with their genitals, feeling that it doesn't wholly represent their gender identity. On the flip side though, many transgender people do feel comfortable with their genitals, but are not comfortable with other aspects of their gender identity. So while genitals can be a part of a transgender person's gender identity, they don't have to be a major factor or even a factor at all. Outside of genitals, feeling transgender can just be a general uncomfortability with being treated as one gender when you feel like the other. A trans person who is assigned male at birth but identifies as a woman is considered a trans woman. A person who is assigned woman at birth but identifies as a man is considered a trans man. Remember, biological sex is different than gender identity, which is how you identify in your head and in your heart. The third component is sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is itself an entire spectrum of identities. Sexual orientation itself is also not determined by biological sex or gender identity. So sexual orientation is who you want to date, and gender identity is how you see yourself. For example, a trans woman who finds only men attractive is considered straight, even though she's trans. So to recap, biological sex is determined by your chromosomes, male, female, or intersex. Gender identity is how you identify on a spectrum between masculine and feminine. And sexual orientation is how your gender identity relates to the gender identity or identities that you find attractive. However, not all people identify as the binary identities of boy and girl, but somewhere in between the two. So gender isn't two locked boxes that we find ourselves in. Gender is actually a spectrum that we all can move along, or not identify with at all. But that's a topic for the next video. The bottom line, while sex is determined at birth, gender identity is self-generated. So respect everyone's self-identification.
All right. So sexual orientation, again, we discussed it. These are some of the identities that fall underneath sexual orientation or sexual identity. So we have gay, lesbian, straight, bisexual, pansexual, and asexual, which we covered we covered all except straight, which I imagine everyone is familiar with, someone engaging in a romantic relationship or sexual relationship with someone of a different gender than themselves. So here we have the gender unicorn, which is provided by the Trans Student Educational Resource. This is a really, really great way just to summarize everything that we've just discussed. So you'll see the thought bubble with the rainbow that represents the gender identity. So how someone sees themselves on the inside and how they think about themselves. The gender expression is, you see the green dots along the outside there, representing the entire outside of this unicorn is their gender expression and how they choose to show that expression to the world. You see the little DNA matrix guy there at the genital area, which is going to represent the sex assigned at birth. And again, there are not just two, it can be male, female, or intersex. And then we have the hearts, which is going to be physical attraction and emotional attraction, which can be felt differently in different individuals. Some people don't feel that physical attraction, such as someone who would be asexual. They may just have that emotional attraction and not have that need for physical interaction. So we'll move on. So this was covered in the video. Sex is what's decided at birth. Again, as we mentioned, generally, that when a baby is born, the doctor, looks at the genitals to determine, okay, this is a boy or this is a girl. They don't do testing to see what the chromosomes and hormones say about this new person's sex. They just judge based on looks. So that's why a lot of people who are intersex may not necessarily know about it. So they sometimes find out about it later in life, or when they're going to have children, they find out, I don't have the anatomy inside my body to physically do that. So again, it's important to recognize that there are not just two sexes. So as far as gender, this is the understanding of individuals have about their own internal identity. So there are many genders: cisgender, transgender, non-binary, and two-spirit. This is based off people's experiences and is a very personal and unique to each gender. So we can go forward. So gender identity, we'll go into all of these here. So cisgender is going to be someone whose gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth, whereas transgender individuals are going to have identity conflicts with the sex they feel on the inside and the sex that they were assigned at birth. Non-binary individuals are going to be people who identify outside of that gender binary and fall somewhere in between man and woman on a spectrum. Then we have two-spirit individuals. So this is when someone experiences a sexual orientation, gender, and or sex that is outside of the binary. So this is very to stress on this point. This term can only be used when speaking about individuals who are First Nation, Native American, and Indigenous people. This is something that dates back way, like it's ingrained in their culture. And these individuals have to be within these cultures to be identifying as two-spirit. I do see a hand. Is that a question?
Go ahead, Chris. Do you have a question?
No, I don't.
All right, so we'll keep moving on then. So genderqueer is going to be identifying outside of the gender binary, very much like non-binary. Genderqueer is just a different term, and people who identify outside of that gender binary can refer to themselves as genderqueer or non-binary, just like someone who is attracted to more than one gender can identify as bisexual or pansexual. So again, it's going to that personal decision and making sure that we are respecting that person's identity as well as their pronouns is very important. So there's also agender, which is when someone doesn't identify with a gender at all. They may, they don't feel like they have a gender identity. They feel like their gender identity is neutral or like not really necessarily different. So this again is a personal decision and something that we want to make sure that we're respecting. If others are making us aware that, hey, I identify as agender, that they may not feel like they belong to either one or the other, or they just don't feel like they fit within those boxes. So again, it's important to make sure that we're validating these people and respecting their identities. So gender fluid is, again, kind of something under the genderqueer non-binary umbrella. So gender fluid is going to be when someone can shift their gender over time. So for instance, someone can wake up in the morning and feel super, super feminine and put on a dress with makeup and do their hair. And later that day, when they go out with their friends, they may be feeling a bit more masculine and want to wear a tie. So gender fluid is going to shift over the course of time. This shift can happen in days. And this shift can happen in weeks. This shift can happen through years. So someone may feel super, super feminine for 5 years and then have a shift in their gender identity and feel a more masculine gender identity. So I see the agender and non-binary, the difference. So non-binary is going to identify as a gender. They're just not identifying within the gender binary. Agender does not relate to a gender at all. They don't feel male, female, they feel genderless. Does that explain? I know that one's a little bit more difficult to grasp. Does that explain it for you though, Barb? You can also see in the picture here, Jonathan Van Ness, who was earlier in the Queer Eye for the Straight Guy picture in his skirt. And Jonathan Van Ness explores their gender identity all over the place. Sometimes they're a little bit more feminine, sometimes they're more masculine. In the picture also is Harry Styles, who again has been showing in magazines more feminine style, and really making it okay to not conform and be different and express yourself how you feel you are. And something to be sure always is to make sure that you're using the appropriate pronouns as well as names. So now we're going to talk a little bit about expression versus perception. So we've spoken about expression, and this is how we show our gender to the world. So style of clothing, haircut, body hair, makeup, accessories, anything that you can put on your exterior to show the world how you want to express yourself. Whereas perception is going to be how the world views that picture that you're presenting to the world. So I'm going to use myself as an example. As I said, I identify as a cisgender female lesbian. I am very masculine showing. I have short hair. I don't wear makeup. I don't wear accessories. Don't carry a purse. I wear men's clothing. Not always have, but ever since high school have been more comfortable in male clothing. And when going into the women's room, I have often been asked, you're in the wrong restroom. I've had men follow me in assuming that I'm a man going into the men's room. So the perception that people see, it's important to understand that what you see may not be the case. So it's important to try not to misgender people. For me personally, being misgendered was not offensive because I'm comfortable in my gender identity. But for somebody who is not comfortable in their identity, it can ruin their entire day. It can just ruin them entirely. So it's really, really, really important not to assume. I know it's something we're all very good at. We're primed to assume. I do it regularly. We all do. It's just the way we as humans were built. But it's important to recognize that we are assuming so that in the future, we don't make those same assumptions. So we are at another checkpoint. So next question here, what's the difference between sex and gender? Helen says sex, the doctor decides at birth. Gender is personal choice. All right, looks like everyone is paying attention. I love it. So the next question is, what are some different genders that exist that we discussed? All right, we have cisgender. So bisexual is going to be, yep, you caught it. You caught it. All right, Annie, I see you. Helen says male, female, non-binary, genderqueer, got some gender fluid, agender. Very good. All right. So are non-binary and genderqueer individuals the same? Okay, so we need a little bit of clarification on this one, which I understand, because again, some of these terms can be really, really difficult to understand. So they're not the same, but they're very, very similar. So as we mentioned, and Helen mentioned in the chat, it's a personal choice. So people can choose to identify with either one of those identities or both of them even. It's just, but no individuals are the same, but these individuals are going to identify outside of the gender binary. Does that make that clarification? So it is, like Mary said, a synonym. Is that clarified for you, Rhonda?
I see some people kind of shaking their heads no, or like maybe. So I think maybe the people who are still unsure, do you want to write in a question into the chat so Christine can answer it specifically? Barb says just to say more.
It's not the same thing because they're different identities. Think of it kind of like pansexual and bisexual, right? So those are both sexual identities that are going to have attraction to more than one gender. It's just different wording for it. So bisexual and pansexual individuals are going to be attracted to people based on the gender, without the gender, right? So they're not concerned about what the gender is of the individual that they're dating, just like non-binary and genderqueer individuals are not interested in identifying themselves as male or female, but somewhere in between. Is that more clarifying? I know a lot of these are like tough concepts to get, but it's basically a synonym. So they're very similar, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the individuals are the same, but it's just a personal choice. Choice of terms for an individual, yeah, basically. So if someone, identifies outside of that gender binary, they can say, oh, I'm genderqueer, or I'm non-binary, or both, or neither. Labels are important to those who find value in labels, which not everybody does. There are a lot of people that don't like the labels that exist. But it's just going to go back to a personal choice and how that individual wants to identify. Is that more clarifying? So the last one is, what does gender fluid mean? So gender fluid is a shift in gender over time. Exactly. So do we have any other questions before we get into this next video? I want to make sure before we move forward that everyone is on the same page as me.
There's a question in the chat. Is it okay to be aware of and respectful of all that you are teaching us without having to be able to give a definition of each category?
I think it's important to understand the definitions of each category so that it's not just a label. It's allowing you to understand this person and a part of them. So as far as like category, the important thing with the labels is that we understand what they mean and what they represent, so that when you come in, you encounter somebody and they say I'm pansexual, you're not like, okay, well, then what does that mean? You kind of have that information already in your database up there, because we've talked about the definitions, and I know that there are a lot of them and they are continuing to make more, just to be more inclusive, to make sure that individuals are all feeling like they're seen. So I think it is important to go through the definitions just so that we understand how people that identify within these identities feel and what that means for this individual. Does that clarify that? I know there are a lot of terms, and this is so far from an exhaustive list of terms and identities, and they can get a lot more confusing. So this is a basic overview, which I know it doesn't seem like a basic overview, but it's just kind of to represent to people that there are so many different kinds of people within the LGBTQ plus community. And all of those people have different feelings about either the way that they see themselves or the way that they are attracted to others. We have any other questions before we listen to Audrey?
Barb just wanted to clarify, did you see that comment in the chat? She says, so non-binary and genderqueer are synonyms, but people may choose one or the other to describe themselves.
Yes, exactly. So it's personal preference.
Okay. And Christine, we're not taking a formal break, right?
No.
Okay,
Do we want to take a formal break?
Nope. I just wanted to encourage anyone. I saw a couple people get up. If anybody needs a restroom break or a drink or anything, please feel free to get up whenever you need to. But Christine's going to continue on, and we'll send out a recording to everyone afterwards. So if you do want to go back, you'll have the opportunity to do that at your own leisure. Okay. I think that's it. Okay, go ahead, Christine.
All right. I do see Sharon here in the chat talking about labeling. Labeling has always made me sad because I don't know why it's necessary, but now I see it's not about me. It's needed for the person who is seeking to be understood. Can you add anything? Absolutely. I can add quite a bit. So when I came out, a good majority of these identities were not spoken about. I came out almost 20 years ago. And when I came out, the community, at least from what I can recall, it was a big movement for no labels. Don't label me. I don't need your labels. I don't want your labels. I am me. And what we're seeing now is all of these different identities. And I felt the very same way about it. I don't understand how this shift happened from going to from no labels to like 17 labels on each individual. But exactly right, Sharon, is that it's not about us, it's about that individual. And I think this video is really going to help people understand the non-binary, not recognizing, not identifying within that gender binary. It's really important to understand that these identities have nothing to do with you. So my identity of being a lesbian has no impact on any of you, but it impacts me every second of every day. So I have found that younger kids in the queer community find a sense of safety in having a label to identify themselves with, so that they as a group can find each other. Through my work with Also, I have found we hang many of the different flags at our events when we're out in the community, and the younger generations are so excited when they see their flag represented, and not just like the Progress flag or the Gay Pride flag, but the flags that we saw on the signs, like the bisexual flag and non-binary flag. There are so many flags representing different identities, whether it be a sexual identity or a gender identity. And when I'm out in the community and people identify with any of those identities, they are like, it makes their day to see that they were represented and see that they are seen. So I think, yes, it is all about the people who are needing those labels, but I think it's also important for all of us on the outside to remember that, you don't know this person's journey, you don't know this person's path, and they are trying to figure out who they are, and it's important to recognize that. Thank you for bringing that up, Sharon, because it is something that the shift was very strange to me from my perception generation-wise, but through working with youth now and seeing how belonging somewhere gives them that confidence and that comfort and that support that they need to help them to discover their true selves. All right, so this video, Audrey is incredible. This young person is just more well-spoken than many adults. So I hope you all enjoy this video, and we can kind of discuss after the video, so that if there are any things that need to be clarified or anything anyone wants to discuss, we can do so.
I wonder what you first think when you see me. Perhaps it's something about my curls. People often mention them. Or, what a dapper little man. In my experience, one of the first things people do is assume I'm a boy or aren't sure whether I'm a girl or a boy. We do this to everyone. We assume what gender someone is based on how they look. And if we can't tell, we get confused. I say we because I do it too. It's ingrained, our first decision and mostly unconscious. But why? Well, I'm Audrey, and if we're talking biology, I'm female. But I feel that it's more complex than that. For an entry point, let's look at my style. As you can probably see, I have a unique style. But I wasn't born wearing suits, bow ties, and flamingo socks. My style had to evolve, and it will keep evolving. And I think it gives some insight into my changing experience of gender. Here's a photo of me before I started school, wearing a Star Wars top, a skirt and sneakers, demonstrating to the world that I'm a girl. It's the skirt, right? We all know that sign. So at this age, I was just a girl who didn't really care too much about what I wore. It was functional and varied. This all took a different turn when I hit the age of 5 and started school. I remember one of my first days at school, and I was in the girls' toilets when 2 girls I knew came near me and said, "Look, there's a boy in here." I looked over my shoulder, but there was no one there. So I asked them where. I realized they meant me. I was really shocked, as I'd only ever really been around people who knew and understood me. I felt upset and alienated. Eventually, this misrecognition started happening in public bathrooms as well, with adults assuming my gender. Often I would get things like, "Why are you in here?" or "Wrong bathroom." This eventually led to me being hesitant and tentative about even going to the bathroom in public. Mostly, people didn't actually say anything at all. They just stared at me. This felt and feels worse. At school, this happened increasingly often, but while many people in that situation might have started dressing more typically female in dresses with long hair or bows, I became more and more masculine presenting, wearing what we consider to be boys' clothes, because in them I felt most authentically myself. I was pretty adamant about just wearing male things. What that meant to me was no pink or even purple or any form of dress, skirt, or even glitter and frills. I didn't think of myself as a boy, but anything that was identified as female felt uncomfortable to me. I adopted the label of tomboy, which meant a girl that wore boys' clothes and played with boys' toys. To me, this avoided conflict. Tomboys are common, right? Even considered a stage, as though we'll grow out of it. My parents never fought my insistence on avoiding dresses. They allowed me to choose what I wore because they believed it had no bearing on who I was. I started wearing shirts and bow ties to any slightly formal event. Here's a photo of me at 6 wearing a bow tie made out of paper, because Dad was wearing his fabric one. As for my experience in bathrooms, I tried to avoid the problem by waiting until people left before I went in, because otherwise I'd feel trapped. Until about the age of 9, when someone mistook me for a boy, I would reply confidently that I'm a girl. But eventually it stopped feeling right. Instead of gaining confidence the more it happened, I lost it. Girl didn't feel right, but boy didn't feel correct either. So what did I want? I'm not sure I really knew at the time. My friends started getting more and more into sports, but I was never sporty. I was a bookworm. If I were a boy, people would probably have said I was a sensitive one. They don't tend to use that term as much for girls, because it's what's expected. So I started hanging out with a group of girls. This didn't really alter my style, more my attitude to the word tomboy, which I grew to dislike. I started to realise I could still be a girl and wear typically male things. In my mind, I was still a girl because I didn't feel like a boy. At the age of 8, I travelled with my parents and the cast of our film 52 Tuesdays to the Berlin International Film Festival. 52 Tuesdays was partly about a mum transitioning from female to male. I imagine some of you are thinking, "Oh no, Audrey just got this gender confusion from her parents' filmmaking." But this gender questioning happened before they started considering it, and they say I've taught them as much about this as they've taught me. Anyway, in Berlin, I met Bart. Bart wore drapey black materials, high-heeled boots, nail polish, and eyeliner. But he wasn't dressed as a woman. This demonstrated to me that I could be flamboyant and androgynous with my style, that my love of bow ties didn't need to exclude anything traditionally female. That year, when the film won the Crystal Bear Youth Jury Award, I took to the red carpet in eyeliner and nail polish. Here's a photo of me that night. Note the bow tie. I started to think of gender as something more dynamic. Gender was not your genitals, or even what you wore or acted like. And maybe it wasn't fixed. I'm going to take a second to pose a question to you. Why does it matter to you whether I am a boy or a girl? And if you think it doesn't, I'm going to really ask you to stop and think. Have you ever come across someone whose gender you just can't place? Have you wanted to know, even if you don't care either way, have you wanted to know what they are? For those of you who say, no, I'm totally comfortable not knowing. I don't use he or she when talking about them. I just treat them as a human without any gender identifiers. Well, that's impressive. It's hard to do. Just try and talk about someone for a minute without using gendered terms. It's really difficult. This is Audrey. Audrey is a young person who doesn't identify as any gender. Audrey writes stories and they love writing. Audrey loves writing, not the stories love writing. Whoops. It's hard for all of us. We want to know because of our language, and also, in my experience, it's because we treat men and boys differently to women and girls, and we want to know how to treat them. Sometimes I'm glad that people mistake me for a boy, because I get to have real conversations with people. They ask me about my future, and we talk about what I want to do. Often, when they find out I'm not a boy, they don't know how to treat me. My friends who show more outward signs of being girls often get called things like sweetheart or darling or love. People comment on how pretty they are. Recently, when I travelled overseas, I noticed a trend of gender-neutral or all-gender public bathrooms, which makes me feel so relieved. Having that choice makes me love going to the bathroom in public, and I love that I don't have to tell anyone what genitalia I own. Here's a photo of me in my sparkle pants, as I call them. They really added flair to my style, and they also really confused some people about whether I am a boy, or even possibly make them uncomfortable, because I seem like a very flamboyant or even girly boy. Though I don't think this is always easy, I'm so happy with the choices I made when I was younger to wear what made me feel good and that I felt expressed me, because I think I would be a much unhappier kid otherwise. I still get called a boy in public situations, but in terms of bathrooms, I try to go to the all-gender or unisex ones, or if I can't, I go to the disabled toilets. Although I do still use the girls' loos in school and sometimes in public. Using the girls' toilets, I never feel good, and I still have a tendency to go with someone else. Although I'm not labelled as a particular gender when I go to the disabled toilets, I don't feel great still, because it just reminds me that there are mostly no toilets for people like me, who don't identify within the gender binary, and that toilets are just another way we categorise people. My style has evolved drastically since the Star Wars t-shirts and skirts of my early childhood, and I think it has a lot to say about how I now appreciate and consider gender. I've realised that for me, gender is a spectrum. What my gender expression and identity is entirely about me and not about how other people perceive me. I don't know how we deal with that in a world so desperate to define by gender. I'm going to leave you with that same question. Why does it matter to you whether I am a boy or a girl? Or that I am in the wrong bathroom? Does it really matter to you which bathroom I use? Because it does matter to me. Would it hurt you not to know someone's gender? Because despite how uncomfortable it might make you feel, you assuming my gender makes me feel uncomfortable every day. All I'm asking is for you to just sit with that little bit of uncomfortable to make someone else feel better. Because it does matter to me. It matters to me when I walk down the hall with my friends and you say, "Hey girls," but it doesn't mean that I want you to make amends. I don't hold my grudges, but every time you say that, it smudges my happy thoughts into undefinable whirls. It matters to me when you say I'm a handsome lad, because while you may be complimenting, it makes me question my inner vision of myself. So, strangers, sit uncomfortably while I tell you how my gender ranges. From day to day, sometimes neutral, sometimes fluid, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce. It doesn't make me a boy, but it doesn't mean that I'm realigning, and I don't want to be redefining what it means to be a girl, because I'm not a girl. So it does matter to me. Style had to evolve, and it will keep evolving.
Difficulties. Start from here. So I love this presentation with Audrey. I think that the way that they put things is just so well said. And as somebody who identifies within the gender binary, I don't feel like I can give people this representation because I don't know what it feels like myself. So in trying to figure out how to communicate this to people and have them understand what it means, I came across this video and was just completely blown away by the way that Audrey carries themselves, about the way they speak about their experiences. And I would say they're in this time where when they're giving this presentation, they are still a kid and they know so much. So I see that some people are really interested and enjoyed this video, but I'm wondering if anybody had any questions or points that you wanted to make about Audrey's presentation.
I just have a question in terms of the presenter is uncomfortable all the time, but it would be as he or she, however, he's not or she's not clear on how he or she wants to be identified. So how are we supposed to know? I mean, you're going to make, as he or she said, an assumption. Look at it. That's every bit a presentation like a boy. And so it makes it, I know he's uncomfortable, but that's just going to keep happening. I mean, it's just going to keep happening that, you know, if he's or she is in a meeting and somebody's or putting something in chat that says the pronoun, then you can use it. But I'm not getting from that presentation what I'm supposed to be doing differently.
So I can speak to that, and I understand where you're coming from in needing to know, how to refer to people, because again, we don't want to assume, as we discussed. My guess is, and this is a guess entirely, my guess is that Audrey uses they, them pronouns, which are neutral pronouns. They may also use neopronouns, which we'll talk about briefly. But my guess is in regular conversation, Audrey would likely identify themselves, introduce themselves to people by saying, hi, my name's Audrey, and I use they, them pronouns. Just like I introduced myself today, saying my name's Christine and I use she, her pronouns. Because if we're not supposed to assume, then that information needs to be provided for us. But this platform that Audrey is speaking in, they're not having a direct conversation with anybody where they would need to refer to them. So it's an overview, like it's just an explanation of gender and how it can range and how it feels to identify outside of that binary. I understand the confusion with pronouns, but as far as giving a presentation and how I speak to people, face-to-face, one-on-one, it can be very different. If you're talking to a large group of people, it may not be necessary for them to know your pronouns. It may not be necessary for you to know their gender identity or their sexual identity. Does the fact that I'm a lesbian impact anybody in any way? Only if they allow it to. The thing that I try to keep in mind when it comes to gender identity is that society has placed ways we treat women and girls and ways we treat men and boys. And you would likely think that, as Audrey said, that if they were a boy, they would likely be a sensitive one, which generally is not associated with a boy, because boys are supposed to be dirty and rough and tumble and crazy, and girls are supposed to be sweet and pretty and dainty. But the fact is that there are boys and girls who are outside of those interests all over the place. So it's important to remember that the binary system that we function with in society can be difficult for people. And it has been difficult for people for many hundreds of thousands of years. It's just now getting to the point where it's becoming common knowledge to people who are not identifying within that identity or the community. So it can be confusing as far as pronouns go. If you're unsure, instead of switching between she or he, or, you know, I'm not sure what gender this person identifies with, they, them pronouns are a safe bet. So for instance, if you are somewhere and somebody left something at the table you get seated at a restaurant, it's a cell phone. Well, someone left their cell phone. You wouldn't assume that that person was female. You wouldn't assume that that person was male. They left their cell phone. So it's a neutral term so that you're not assuming, so that it's a quote unquote safe way to approach people if you're unsure of their gender, because they does not put a label of non-binary or genderqueer on any individual. It's just a general overall term that can be used for people when we're not sure who we're actually speaking about. Does that help, Alice?
Yeah, I mean, basically what I hear you saying is that if I see somebody and I am unsure that I should use they or them or something that's non-identified, let the person identify the gender, because in this presentation, Otter was not even sure, didn't identify with the gender. I mean, it was so that it's, you know, and then if she left a cell phone down, you would, you know, and you're in the mall and you're looking at her, you'd use a masculine pronoun, because for all the world, that's the perception. You know, I mean, there are some people that you can't tell, but she definitely presents as a male.
So the thing to remember with individuals being non-binary is that they don't identify with a gender. They don't feel right identifying as a female. They don't feel right identifying as a male, because they feel that there are parts of them that are feminine and parts of them that are masculine. So they're not identifying with one gender or the other. They're identifying outside of that system. So they feel as though they have moments where they're more feminine and moments where they're more masculine, and that can change and flux. Just like we spoke about gender fluidity a little bit earlier, it can change. And the they them pronouns is just a safer bet when referring. So if somebody had left their cell phone but you didn't know who it was, so like if you saw Audrey leave their cell phone somewhere, you might say, well, he left his cell phone.
Exactly.
Understandable.
Yeah.
However, if you're seated at a table in a restaurant where somebody has already eaten and left and find a cell phone in the booth, and you don't know the gender of that person, you're not going to assume the gender.
No, you're going to say someone. Yeah.
So it could be anybody who left the cell phone. Likely if it was a purse, you would assume it would belong to a woman, but there are a lot of men who carry purses as well. So.
Okay.
I'm not sure how old Audrey is. I would guess around 13 or 14 at this time, but that's a guess. How the developmental changes that are going to be ongoing. Yeah, developmental changes definitely. I mean, it changes even not just in kids. So it can be discovered later in life. So I have someone who I know who is transgender, male to female, who came out as transgender at 78 years old. So this individual lived their life 78 years as a man. And at 78 years old, he went out for a walk on their farm and told his wife, you know, I would be back. And he went out for a walk, and his wife, you know, well, it's been a while. I'm going to go check on him, make sure he's okay. And she found him sitting under a tree with a rope tied in a noose, crying. And he said, I couldn't find a branch that was low enough. And that feeling and that struggle that that individual is going through in that moment at 78 years old is a struggle that that person has had to deal with every day for 78 years without figuring out and identifying and being who they truly are. Fortunately for this individual, their wife was super supportive and embraced them and wanted them to be happy and be around. And they together went through the journey of this transition, full surgery, top, bottom, hormones, the whole nine, at 78 years old. So it can happen at any time in somebody's life. Everybody processes things at different times, different speeds. Different topics are processed faster in some people than others. And it's just important to remember that regardless of age, if someone's feeling these things, we have to respect that. And we have to honor that in using the right pronouns and not assuming, as it's tough to do. And they, them pronouns are difficult to use when referring to a singular person. I will say that firsthand myself. I have struggled with it. I work very, very hard at improving it. I actually have a rubber duck on my desk that is named Zeke, who does not identify with either pronouns. So they use they, them pronouns. And it's a way for me to practice using they, them pronouns in reference to a single individual. I've also been practicing very recently not using terms like, hey guys, or hello ladies, or, you know, those gender terms that could have potential to make somebody who identifies outside of that gender binary feel really, really uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable doesn't get taken away. So the fact I am more than happy to do my best to try and improve that so that people don't have to be uncomfortable in my presence, despite the fact that it's difficult to learn something new and to change my behaviors and to really rewire the way that I think about pronouns and how I refer to people. So it's a process. We're gonna go into pronouns a little bit more here. So as I mentioned, it's really, really, really important when you're introducing yourself to introduce yourself with your pronouns. And it's important to do so that when you do encounter individuals who use different pronouns or who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community and know the importance of pronouns, when someone introduces themselves to me and uses their pronouns, I automatically know that that person is an ally for the LGBTQ plus community because they're trying to be as inclusive as possible. So when I introduce myself, and again, it's something I'm working on, not necessarily something that I've mastered yet, but I'm growing and learning every day. It just, it can be difficult, but it's important to make that shift. I still do introduce myself without my pronouns on occasion. I try very hard not to. And I'm practicing when I introduce myself to new people using my pronouns so that they know that I'm an ally. And if they use they, them pronouns, or they identify using different pronouns, they'll automatically feel safe with me because they know that I'm aware about pronouns and know that I have that knowledge. So the assuming can be really, really difficult, as Alice mentioned, and it is difficult, and it is an adjustment. And it's not always easy. But as you can see here, this data was taken from the Trevor Project. They do every year a survey of LGBTQ plus youth over all over the United States. And they had 35,000 individuals that they polled this past year, which was, keep in mind, the pandemic when everyone was home. So any LGBTQ plus youth who were home may not have had support and may not have been recognized with their preferred name or pronouns. So when kids are identified with their chosen name and pronouns, suicidal ideation decreased by 29%, and suicidal behavior decreased by 56%. So the name and pronouns are a really, really big topic as far as the youth in the schools, because if the parents are not accepting of the child's identity and pronouns and name change, legally, they can't change the paperwork. So it's tough for teachers to know when they're using the, it can happen where kids are outed and misgendered the first day of school, and now for the rest of the school year, that's what everybody remembers. So it's important to keep in mind that these name and pronouns are not just for that individual, but also as a way for them to have like notoriety. So they're not necessary, if a child is transgender, female at birth, transitioning to be a boy, if they have short hair, a short haircut, wearing boys' clothes, there wouldn't necessarily be that assumed gender because puberty hasn't hit. A lot of those identifiers of gender aren't necessarily there. But using the pronouns that the kids prefer, it just it makes them feel seen, it makes them feel accepted, and it makes them feel as though they have support. So I mentioned earlier that there are neo-pronouns. So we know she, her, hers, he, him, his, and they, them, theirs. These other pronouns are called neo-pronouns. And generally these neo-pronouns are alternate pronouns used by non-binary or genderqueer individuals. So people that don't identify with within the gender binary, they identify somewhere in the middle. And as I mentioned earlier, labels are important to many people, but not to everybody. Some people are very proud of their labels and wear t-shirts stating such. Other people don't identify with any labels, they're just them. So it is up to the individual to determine for themselves if they are going to put labels on themselves and what those labels are going to be, or if they don't want any labels at all. The difference between the last three. So it's just the spelling. They're actually pronounced similarly. Again, like I mentioned, I'm always learning. I have a classmate of mine who uses Z, them with the X pronouns. And I went and asked Z what the difference was between the ZE and the XE, and it's just personal preference. So it's, again, choosing whatever that individual feels most comfortable represents them as a person. It's Z, they, and hair, Z, them, zir, V, ver, viz, and there are like a ton of neopronouns. These three are some of the more common ones, but there are a ton of different neopronouns. So supporting trans and non-binary individuals is a topic that a lot of people are not really sure, like how do I support these individuals? So big thing is it's up to those individuals to tell others about their identity. It's not your place. So it is important to remember that, so that you're not unintentionally outing somebody that could potentially put them in a dangerous situation. And that's the case too for any individual within the LGBTQ plus community. Transitioning, as far as going from one gender to another, can be really difficult. There are hormones involved, so everything gets all wonky in the internal chemicals and all of that stuff. And everybody's transition is different. So it's important not to ask personal questions. And when I say personal questions, I am referring to asking about surgeries, asking about genitals, asking, you know, what genitals do you have in your pants? That's nobody's business except that person and anybody that they may choose to have a sexual relationship with. So some people think it's okay if people identify as transgender to ask them if they've had surgery or not. And it's not. You don't ask people about their genitals in normal conversation. So it's important to keep that in mind when talking to trans people as well. So as I mentioned earlier, there is no right age for someone to understand gender identity. There are kids that are 4 and 5 identifying as transgender. So there is no right age. It can happen at any time. 25% of LGBTQ plus youth identify outside of that gender binary. So 20% or 25% of LGBTQ plus youth are going to identify as non-binary or not either one, or not male, not female, somewhere in between. And as we covered, gender identity is very different from sexual orientation. Misgendering, as we spoke about, can be done unintentionally or accidentally, or it can be done intentionally to hurt somebody. And in doing this intentionally to cause harm to another person is not acceptable. It's unacceptable. Misgendering happens by accident. You can apologize and move forward. I also like to just put this out there. So when people are transitioning and becoming their true selves, it is often referred to, there are often people who are referred to as passing. So someone who has transitioned from female to male, who you could not physically tell was born a female, would be considered somebody passing. And that's not a term that we use, but it's something that I like to bring out there so that if people do hear it, they understand that that's not acceptable in our community. People are people. It doesn't matter how feminine or masculine you are. It's important also to remember that individuals, so my friend who at 78 years old came out, is going to be more developed as a male atomically, because they spent 78 years as a male. Whereas somebody who is a kid who has puberty suppressant to stop puberty from kicking in may not develop those secondary sexual characteristics, and may be able to, you know, not have to battle Adam's apple or deepening of the voice or the things that come with puberty. Come on. All right. So mistakes can and will happen. Misgendering, using pronouns, using the wrong names, or saying something that you did not know or think would be hurtful. It's okay to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. It's just that you want to be sure you're acknowledging them. So if you're making a mistake, you want to make sure that you're working toward improving those mistakes, right? So if you offend somebody, what do? You can listen. This may make you uncomfortable. But it will give you the opportunity to learn and grow and make sure that in the future, you're making others feel as though that you accept and respect them. Second is taking responsibility. So making mistakes, correcting yourself, showing that you are putting forth that effort. So often when I am misgendering people and trying to adjust to they, them pronouns, I will use she, her, or he, him pronouns, and we'll be like in conversation and I will be talking about her, them, and I'll correct myself. So you start to say, shh, okay, and then it clicks in your head like, okay, that's not the right pronoun. You can correct yourself. That shows the individual that you're putting forth effort and that you do respect their identity. And of course, learning from your mistakes, educating yourself, and apologizing. But in apologizing, it's important to make sure that you're not making a scene around the mistake that you made, because that can just make things worse. So, if you're, oh my God, oh, I used the wrong pronouns. I'm so sorry about that. Now the whole conversation is now focused on that person. So it can sometimes make it more difficult, but when you're adjusting, it is understandable that you're going to make mistakes. And generally individuals that are identifying using different pronouns understand that it's a transition. I've even had people tell me that they misgender themselves as they're adjusting to their new discovered identity. So the one big thing to remember is to do better in the future. And we can all, do things that we feel would positively impact the LGBTQ plus community and individuals that we have in our lives. So when someone comes out to you, it can be emotional. It can have all sorts of feelings. But something you want to remember is you want to make sure that you're caring. So you want to make sure that you're showing a sense of compassion and that you're letting these individuals know that you love them. In assessing is making sure, just checking in with that person and making sure that they're okay. And, resources, what resources do I know about that I can share with this individual that may benefit them? So if someone were to come out to any of you here today, you could suggest to them also youth, because we are an organization for LGBTQ plus youth. There's also the Trevor Project, which is an incredible resource for all ages. And then to go that extra mile to make sure that you're checking in with that person after they have come out to you and shared this side of themselves with you and trusted you with this information, to make sure that you're, following up with how are you doing? How are things going? So it's really important to just show the care and, the fact that you want these people to be comfortable being who they are, and that it doesn't matter to you what that means, that they are them and you love them regardless. So when someone shares with you that they're, is coming out, first thing you want to do is you want to thank them, because they're trusting you to be a safe space for them to share this information. So thanking them will show them that you understand that this is not easy for them. This is a difficult task. It's also important to let them express themselves, as well as I'm, mentioning resources and following up with them periodically. So we have another video, and again, I could say it, but he just says it so much better. So he has a really, really incredible analogy as well that I just can't say as well as he does. So we're going to play this one. And this is going to offer things that you do not say when someone comes out to you.
Welcome back! So you're lucky enough to have a person in your life come out to you. Congratulations! That is a huge moment. But now it's time to tread carefully because there are a few things that you could say that could ruin this moment forever and possibly tarnish your friendship forever. But before we get into them, give this video a big thumbs up, and I always try to use laughter and positivity and a little bit of sass to make the world a better place. If that sounds like your vibe, I think you found your tribe. Make sure you subscribe. Let's jump into it. Here are some things that you should definitely not say when someone comes out. Coming up. Number 1, do not say, I already knew. Now, I'm not going to say it's the same thing for everyone because we're all very, very different people, but for most people in the LGBTQ community, for a lot of the time before we come out, we spend a lot of our effort trying to convince everyone around us, including ourselves, that we are what society thinks is normal. So for you to say that you already knew, that's just a huge kick right in the ego. Ow. And really, unless your name is Clay Aiken and you had the ability to turn invisible and watch me in my room while I was secretly kissing boys, no, you didn't know. You were assuming. And you know what they say about assuming? Something about a donkey or something? I don't know. Look it up. Number 2, my whole life I have been really bad at math, like embarrassingly bad at math. But the one thing that I do mathematically understand is this moment is 100% not about you. So please, for the love of all things holy, do not say,
you should have told me sooner.
This is going to be a little bit hard to hear. It's going to be kind of a tough pill to swallow, but I need you to listen to me on this one. If you feel like it took too long for someone to tell you, it's because it took you that long to seem ready to hear it. It's really that simple. Just remember, people don't stay in the closet because they're comfortable there. People stay in the closet because it's safer. Think of it this way. You know in horror movies when someone hides in a closet and they can see through those little slats in the doors? It's kind of like that. It's not an ideal choice and we really don't want to be in there, but we have to stay hidden until you can prove that you're not the guy with the chainsaw. And you have to find a way to prove that you're not that guy. And until you do that, we can't come out because we only see these little tiny glimpses of the world outside. And we have to use those to make our decision about whether or not we're going to get cut to pieces if we open the door. That was a good analogy. Number 3, please never, ever say, are you sure? Like this isn't a situation where we woke up that morning and thought to ourselves, I wonder if I could join a group of people who are still targeted by hate crimes all around the world and potentially put my life in danger just because I'm in love. Doesn't work like that. Am I sure that I enjoy seeing Ryan Reynolds and a bottle of baby oil making a cameo in some of my naughty dreams? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm okay with that. Yes, we're sure. The only thing that we're not sure about is whether or not it's a good idea to tell people. That's it. Number 4.
Who else knows?
Saying who else knows will always be translated in a few different ways. The first way is,
I know that you're having a moment that could determine the course of the rest of your life, but I want to make this about me for just a moment and make sure that my ego won't get hurt by you telling somebody else before you felt safe enough telling me.
I did mention that I get sassy, right? I did that? Cool. The second translation of this is the one that's the scariest because it's the one that lets us know that you don't want to accidentally out us to someone who doesn't know, which we appreciate, but that also means that you're going to be talking to people about it. Here's the thing. It's not your place to talk about my sexuality at all. It's my job to come out of the closet when I am ready to do so. And coming out is not something that people in the LGBTQ community do once. It's something that we have to do over and over and over again. And it's our decision when we do it. Pushing somebody else out of the closet can potentially be the most harmful thing that you can do to them. It can ruin their life. It can end their lives. You're never fully going to understand why we chose to tell some people and chose not to tell other people. And that's okay because it's our story. We get to decide who we tell it to. So instead of asking who else knows about our story, maybe just be grateful that we gave you a chapter. And the one that's secretly the most dangerous, number 5, I love you anyway. This one might be kind of odd to see in the list, but let me explain it before you go into the comments and try to roast me for it. This sentence consists of 4 words. I love you anyway. Now the first 3 words are awesome. If you stop after those 3 words, you are golden, you're in the clear, you are an awesome friend, an awesome parent, an awesome guardian, and an awesome just human. You're awesome. But if you add the word anyway, congratulations, you just broke someone's heart. Adding the word anyway changes that whole sentence into, despite what I see as negative, I will still choose to love you. Here's the thing, if you feel like it's negative, keep it to yourself, learn how to work through it, because that's a you problem. Just stop it, I love you. Don't say I love you anyway, don't say I still love you, just I love you, and stop there. 3 words, that's all you need. Maybe a touch of, I'll support you. Maybe a pinch of, you're so brave, huh? That's a good one too. You could even try, I'm proud of you. But again, it's not, I'm proud of you anyway, or I'm still proud of you, just, I'm so proud of you. Just stop there. Just stop. Coming out can be a really, really difficult time, but the right response can make it a beautiful memory. So please, please, please be careful. Has someone come out of the closet to you before, or are you someone who's come out of the closet and you've had some pretty strange reactions? Let me know what they are down in the comments section below. And if you're someone who is thinking about coming out of the closet and maybe you're a little bit nervous about it, just remember, if there is a bad reaction, it is a them problem. It is not a you problem. You are perfect. And no matter what happens on that side, I love you. That's all. I love you.
All right, so we are at our final checkpoint, wrapping things up. So I know we covered all of these, and I did not have these planned out like the other ones. Apparently, you've got to make that edit so that they come in one at a time. But what are some of the pronouns individuals may use? All right, he, she, they, ze, very good. And what can you do to support trans and non-binary individuals? Care. Introduce yourself with pronouns. Use the pronouns they prefer, absolutely. Don't tell others, right on. And if you make a mistake, what do you do? Apologize, say I'm sorry, correct it. Absolutely. And now that you have had this 2-hour training, do you all feel as though you would be prepared if someone were to come out to you? All right, I see a bunch of yeses and I'm loving it. All right, do we have any other questions or concerns? Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your willingness to learn with me today.
Christine, I have a question.
Yes.
I have 2 young kids, and I wondered, a lot of, the books, the stories, society, the cultural influences I know are causing them to think about the binary, he, she, and my kids sometimes will point out other kids, oh, that must be a boy because their hair is short. And my husband and I have different opinions about how much we talk about this, and like how much information do we give them now about all of the possibilities, and how do we share with them that there's a spectrum now of gender, and that we're understanding it differently than we did a long time, a long time ago, and we're understanding it differently each day. My husband doesn't want to overwhelm them or influence them one way or another. He wants them to find out on their own. But I feel like society's influence is it is impacting them to a certain extent. And so I feel like there has to be a different way we approach it. And I just don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And that's something that a lot of people are struggling with this shift in the community, and the importance of pronouns and these alternative identities. It can be difficult. With my experience, kids just want to know, so they know how to refer to you. So again, being a masculine presenting woman, when I was a server, I would get questioned, I wouldn't say constantly, but every once in a while there would be a kid who would look at me and say, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And the parents are like, "Oh my God," like mortified, totally embarrassed at the fact that their kid put me in this uncomfortable situation. Me knowing what I know, I realize that these kids are not doing this to be offensive. They're not trying to make me feel any less. They are just trying to understand how they should treat me. Because as Audrey said, we treat women and girls very much differently than we treat women and boys and men. So it's something that I know that there is literature out there. It's few and far between, but there is literature out there. And from my experience, I have a couple of people who have like nieces and nephews who they have come out to as non-binary, and, you know, let them know, you know, I use they, them pronouns, and they picked it up faster than me. I'm still working on it, and they got it down pat. So kids are really, really, I don't want to say malleable because that's a little bit too much, but they understand more than we give them credit for, I think. And I think as we get older, things get a lot more complicated. So I think teaching kids at a younger age that there are alternatives to being a boy or a girl is awesome, but that's up to each parent and how they feel comfortable bringing that to their kids. And I'm not comfortable saying how parents should do that. I don't have children of my own, so I don't know what I would do in said given situation. But kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, and they notice a whole lot more than we may think they do. Does anybody else have any questions? Thank you for that suggestion, Sally, making sure we have more racial ethnic diversity. I definitely agree with that. It's not something I had noticed, so I appreciate you pointing that out to me. Thank you everybody so much for your participation and for your attention. I know this was a long session for you, but I hope it was helpful, and please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Christine. I really appreciate all of your time and all of your openness to all of our questions. We will be sending out a recording to everyone who signed up for the presentation today. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me. I'll include my email in that with the link to the video. And thank you again, Christine.
Absolutely. And I do have the post